This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals, in which Victoria Mady, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind.
Hello, I'm Victoria Mady, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast, where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. And today, my guest is Michelle Niedziela, a behavioral neuroscience expert and neuropsychology, psychology, and consumer science. Michelle worked in both academia, Monell Chemical Sciences Center, and industry, Johnson & Johnson, Mars Chocolate, in research and development of innovation technologies and methodologies for consumer research. And as a VP of Research and Innovation at HCD Research, Michelle now focuses on integrating applied consumer neuroscience tools with traditional methods used to measure consumer response. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Victoria.
I'm so excited to talk with you. Michelle is my first guest who is a neuroscientist. And I should say, to me, neuroscientists are like magicians because they explore the most complex organ, the human brain. Mm-hmm. And basically every discovery from neuroscience leads to further breakthroughs and benefits for, every other industry and for so many aspects of our lives, right? And because Michelle's expertise in sensory science, I have a lot of questions about that. So can you tell us what sensory science is and how we can use its findings, how it can be useful in business, marketing, and events in particular?
Absolutely. I think it's a really interesting space that I think not a lot of people are very aware of, right? We all use products every day in our lives that have designed tastes and smells. And nobody thinks about all the work that actually goes into curating those tastes and those smells. Creating an iconic experience, something that you recognize, that's familiar to you, that you like. Maybe it also, connotes or suggests some sort of use or feeling. We think about cleaning products and lemon smell, right? So it makes you think that something's clean. But, the lemon smell itself is not what's cleaning something. There's actual actives in it that are doing the, disinfecting and everything like that. Of course, lemon itself has its own actions, but it's very interesting that people don't realize how much work actually goes into creating that sensory experience. And our sense of taste and smell is so important to our survival. It's how we navigate the world around us. We smell different things, we taste different things. We have to recognize if a location is dangerous. Do you smell gas, for example? Do you smell smoke? You taste foods and it lets you know if it's healthy for you. Is it providing nutrients? Is it providing calories that you need for your brain to work? Is it something you like? Is it something you don't like? These are all things that are vital to our survival and such an important part of our lives that I think people often forget how integral they are to our navigation of the worlds around us. And so it's something that I've always really found very fascinating and important to better understand. I started off my academic life looking at the drivers of feeding behavior. So understanding when a certain taste or a certain smell affects your hormones. That ultimately controls if you're going to eat a lot of something or a little bit of something. All these things act as signals, and it's basically how we navigate the world around us.
Right. That's fascinating, right? So, is there a difference between using sensory marketing for products and for experiences?
I think that Not really, right? Because it's all about acting as a signal, as a cue for something. So whether the taste or the smell is in a product, right? Like let's say your shampoo has a particular fragrance to it, and it's supposed to be something that you identify as being personal to you. You like that smell, but it also has another purpose, which makes you feel beautiful, that your hair is beautiful, that it's clean, that you're signaling to other people that you're clean. But that's not that different. Creating these emotions, creating this context is not that different in products than it is in some sort of other setting. So you imagine putting fragrance in a hotel lobby, right? It's the same thing. It's welcoming. It's creating a context to the place you are, right? Maybe it's iconic to a particular brand. We can all recognize the flavor of Coca-Cola. In the same way, we can all recognize the fragrance of particular stores in the mall, maybe Abercrombie and Fitch, for example, or maybe it is a hotel, right? That the lobby, a lot of them do have sort of the signature fragrances. So, and that creates both in products and in experiences, a connection, so then you can recall that experience and you're more likely to create a loyalty to that brand when it connects with you on a sensory level. Connections with your sensory, the more connections you have, through sight, taste, smell, sounds, all of these things actually builds a stronger emotional connection. So that's something that's been shown in the research. And so it is very important for brands to think holistically in a sensory marketing way, that it isn't just the product experience, that it's functioning, right? Mm-hmm. Coca-Cola can't just be a drink. It has to be an experience in itself. So I don't think there's exactly a line between the two, because a product experience is an experience.
Right. Absolutely. I read an article on the website, on HCD Research website, about the implicit association. That is how we can create connection between senses and emotions, something that you just mentioned, right? Given specific context. So, for example, the smell of a certain laundry product signals cleanliness, right? Can you talk even more about it? How it is applicable to experiences as opposed to products, and how we can use it specifically in event marketing, for example?
Sure. So the whole idea around implicit association is that we make these shortcuts in our lives. As we experience the world around us and we learn new things, we make connections between two ideas. And the more times we're exposed to these connections, then the faster we are to associate the two of them, right? So, for example, associating certain colors with certain brands, right? Red, again, being for Coca-Cola, right? We associate those strong associations. And the same thing can happen for any of the number of our other senses. But the idea is establishing a connection, and sometimes a shortcut that you can take by understanding sensory, right? And understanding that certain types of fragrances, for example, might give someone, they might associate that fragrance with healthy, right? So if I smell oatmeal, for example, I might associate it with something that's healthy. So then if I am using a face wash that smells like oatmeal, I actually might feel that it's doing better for me, right? I might feel better about it. And I think that this same idea can really set the context for events as well. So if you really think about, how people maybe will be more relaxed, right? Or maybe being more energized, or again, if there's higher order benefits, psychological benefits that aren't so obvious, like, relaxation or being excited, but something that's more higher order, like healthy or happy or, intense or strong or whatever it might be, that you can set this context using sensory cues, right? So they can act as that cue, and it's that automatic association that you have and kind of sets the mood.
Right. I love this point about higher level of associations, because it's not immediate emotion that you want to integrate or to use, right? It's also something that will connect with your event in the long term, maybe.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. And then actually that's something that, it kind of goes back to something I think we've all known for a very long time. You think of Proust, for example, talking about the smell of madeleines. It's very similar in that you can, for example, a colleague of mine, she used a new fragrance, a new perfume at her wedding. And she only takes it out for special occasions, that same exact fragrance, because then it reminds her of her wedding day. So maybe on anniversaries or on her spouse's birthday or anything like that, it can kind of bring you back to that moment, and you associate these feelings of excitement and love and all these other ideas that really are that higher order psychological association.
Right. Absolutely. I love this point. So what are the best ways to incorporate senses into the messaging and into communications to increase this emotional connection?
Well, I think it does take a little bit of research, right? And a little bit of art. There are artists out there that really understand. I think when you think about perfumers, for example, or flavorists, they're chemists, right? Because they understand the chemistry of the compounds that they're dealing with, but it's a bit of an art as well in order to know which combinations to put together. But then after that, it's about the research on looking at exactly what are the reactions people have to these different fragrances, and do they associate it with the context that you're trying to put it into, right? So, making sure that it's a fit to your concept. So if you have an event that is, very exciting, having, that relaxing fragrance is probably not going to drive very well. And we do know that when things don't align, when they're kind of disharmonious, that it actually makes people not like the situation very much. And so that's something to think about, that you need this holistic experience where, the colors, the logos, the sound levels, the fragrances, the taste of the foods, everything like that need to work together to build into that overall context. If it's a healthy event, then you want it all to feed into that idea to be this harmonized message. We think about that a lot when we do advertising, that you have a consistent message, but that should really go into everything. It should go across not only branding, but also into the experiences people have in other ways with a product or event. It should all harmonize together, work together to convey the same idea. The colors need to convey healthy. The fragrances need to convey healthy. It all should work together to build towards that context.
Holistic and holistic approach and consistency are the two key words that we can actually use here, right? So when we attend an event, and I'm now talking an in-person event, there are many sensory stimuli. Are there ways to keep the balance between achieving the goals, for example, the right emotional connection that we are trying to achieve, without sensory overload?
Yeah. So, you don't want to be distracting, right? So if it is a speaking event, you certainly don't want the fragrance in the room to be so overwhelming that it distracts from the focus. So I think everything should play towards the goal. And that's why when I work with clients, it often is about talking, well, what is the goal? What is the goal of your product or your event or whatever it might be? And then that should really be the focus. So all the other cues around it should be driving towards that. Having the colors and everything drive towards the focus. If it is a speaker or if it is a performer or whatever it might be, it should be something that drives towards that and supports that main feature. So I think you do have to keep that in mind, that nothing should be so powerful that it is distracting or detracting from the ultimate goal of the event.
And your company actually hosts an annual event, right? Neuro University Symposium. Have you applied neuroscience or sensory science insights when marketing the event?
So that is a joke that we joke about a lot. There's all these, market researchers, consumer researchers out there that are vendors. And we joke about how often the vendors actually use the methodologies on their own marketing. And while we don't run intensive studies with EEG, for our own purposes or something like that, we do take the principles of it, as being very important. So absolutely, when we run our own event, we try to make sure everything's cohesive and they have a nice flow. And we do think about the branding of the event and that we're driving home a message. So keeping everything, centered on that, focused on that, cohesive and not distracting, right? So making sure that, yes, the food matches in a way, the flavors match, the fragrances that are, the locations that we choose, that it is cohesive with the ultimate message that we're trying to convey.
That's great. And I think, is it available to everyone to attend?
Absolutely.
Right. So I think, it might be good for event professionals to register and actually, attend and watch how it is done.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think last year it was held online, correct?
Yeah. The past 2 years have been online. And what I think has been really beneficial about that is that we are able to reach people who wouldn't be able to come to the Eastern U.S. Prior to that, we were located in New Jersey for the event, which is really great for people, on the eastern seaboard of the U.S. But when we moved it online, we actually got a broader audience with people attending from all over the world. And we were able to invite other speakers because it has been really important for us to be able to integrate in, it's not just the HCD show. Right. We're trying to include experts from other industries as well and other companies because it is all about learning. And we want to foster that. And so within that and creating an event that fosters that ultimate goal of having everybody learn and having experts be able to convey their information, moving online and creating a space that is open and easy for everyone has been very important. So again, thinking of that context and building that harmony, trying to create events that really draw people out, right? That are welcoming and a safe space for people to want to talk about things and network with one another has been really important. And I think part of that still is sensory, right? Because the message that you convey and just the look of things, like how you psychologically draw people out has been a real challenge during the pandemic, right? As more conferences and more events moved online, it became more difficult to try to reach people and connect with people when they aren't sort of like trapped in a room, right? It's very easy to get distracted, turn your camera off and walk away when you're at home. But when you're at an event, you're stuck there until it's over. Everybody's going to see you leave. So trying to make people more engaged, I think does involve engaging them on more levels than just speaking at them, right? So I think thinking about the psychological and neuroscientific ways that we can really engage with people has been very important in being successful with more remote, workings and events and everything like that. And honestly, I think that's going to be a really big thing moving forward as we move into more of the metaverse. Finding ways to actually connect with people wherever they are is really important. I mean, we all have, cell phones with us all over the place, and it's really how we communicate nowadays. So we could be anywhere in the world. We could be grocery shopping and being part of an event at the same time. And so we really need to think about the best ways moving forward to connect with people emotionally, psychologically, engagement-wise, and informatively, making sure that they're getting that information.
Absolutely.
And I think that can be accomplished when you pay attention to those cues and the context and really, ways to connect with people.
Right. And how understanding how the things work on a neural level and psychological level is very important for the event professionals to be able to improve the event design and to connect with people both online or live, right? So event profs, Neuro University Symposium is your chance to get it right, and learn from the experts in neuroscience. Okay, and so my question is this: what happens sense-wise when people experience something face-to-face versus virtual?
It's an interesting question because I think that it's changed over time. Right. So I think if you had looked at the research a couple of years ago, I think the answer would be very obvious that in person is much more engaging. There aren't as many distractions, but we also have to take into account the reality of the world today, right? Where some form of technology is going to be important moving forward. And so we have to adjust our thinking on it and think of ways that we can sort of center people in that way that is very similar to being in person. But having those strong connections, right? Because you are missing almost like an emotional connection you can have with people in person, those chance meetings at the water cooler or the coffee station that you would have had in an event. How can we create that in a virtual environment? Because again, I think that metaverse experience is not going to go away. It's only going to become stronger. So we need to sort of learn from the past, learn from those live engagements and see how we can create that for people in a virtual space. It's going to be important for events because we are a global society. And while I think it is going to be a component that will always be live and be most important to be live, there's also going to have to be that added component that is more remote and virtual. And so finding ways to connect with those people are going to be very important moving forward. Is there something missing potentially in the virtual environment? Absolutely, which is why I think we have to work harder to find ways to connect with people that we are missing, from that in-person live experience.
So what is the best way to appeal to people's senses when interacting online?
I think having people engage in activities. When we had our event last year, we actually had a sensory magician do an event, and this really got people involved. They're using their hands, they were turning on their cameras, and having them do something that you end up part of the whole group. I think that actually brings people together. I think that there are other ways of doing other activities, like having people do teamwork, again, creating that sort of feeling you would get meeting people in person, making those connections, the emotional part of bonding with someone over an activity, that kind of creates something that you would have had in person. So I think it takes a little more work and it takes a little more effort, but it is really important if you do want to establish those feelings in that context of like collaboration, for example. If that's your goal, then you should really take that into mind in how you're curating your activities and events.
I love this point. And I also love that you say it does require a bit more work, but it is beneficial. It will result in much better experience. So
Absolutely.
It's worth it, right? And I know that you are also co-hosting a vidcast, Mindset, which is available both for watching and listening. Can we talk more about audio versus video? Mm-hmm. When I prepared my online course on event psychology, I read many research papers about the impact of audio. And my understanding is that our sense of hearing is very much underrated. Yes. But also since the pandemic started, event organizers embraced many new formats and they started including podcasts as part of their programs. So what does a neuroscience teach us about this sense and how influential the audio format is?
I think, again, it's about captivating people. And I think, people are on the go a lot more. So thinking beyond just the neuroscience of the importance of the sense of hearing, of audio, is also just integrating into people's lives and their habits. And when people are on the go, they really need something that they can multitask with these days. We're all multitasking. And so being able to listen to something without having to watch it on your computer, for example, is really important. So the fact that I could be doing dishes and listening to a podcast and learning about something, learning about neuroscience, learning about psychology, just listening to it while I'm multitasking and doing something else, then I think that that's really important, again, in this future moving forward, listening to it in the car, going for a run, all of these different things. It's very important to be able to integrate into people's lives where they are. And so I think that that's a really key thing of why it's become so important. But I think the visual is also really important. I think especially when we're having conversations with someone. So it's not that you're just listening to something to learn it like you would from a podcast. But if you want to see a little bit more about the facial expressions and interactions that we have, I mean, that really is a huge part of our communication. It's not just the words we speak, but it's evolutionary, right? That facial expressions is part of the way we communicate. So when I smile at you, it's to really show you that I'm not a threat, right? I'm not a threat to you. I'm here to friend you. And your automatic reaction is always going to be to smile back because you're also not a threat to me. And that is something that I think was missing pre-pandemic, right? Where people did a lot of audio calls, for example, and they wouldn't necessarily have a webcam to do a video conference. But now that people can do that you can turn your video on and you can see the other person, I think it really helps, strengthen that connection and understand the person a little bit better. So again, in a lot of our events that we had, like for NeuroU, it's been really important for us to ask people to, turn your webcam on so we can see you. And that way we can communicate a little better. And I think it engages people once again. Now, I think when there's like an interview, like with two people, you and I, it really helps with the communication that I can see your head nodding, right? And so it helps, I think, the conversation flow a little bit better. So even if that video isn't used for the podcast, I think it helps the conversation a little bit better because it is part of that communication that you and I have with each other.
But some people argue actually that video makes them, more stressed, especially over time. It gets its toll, right? And people get this,
Zoom fatigue. Yeah.
Right. So what would you say to that objection?
I think that's perfectly fine. I think, it's okay to say, I don't want to turn my video on. And we all have that option. And I think that's important to say. But, we do invite people, if you want to participate, if you're okay with that, turn your webcam on and let's see one another. And you don't have to do it the whole time, right? But I think it does help, for example, like when we're having like an interview conversation or if we're doing a networking opportunity, it does help to see the person, to really connect with them, see them eye to eye, which is something we miss when we go virtual and we don't have that in-person experience.
Right. So I think in the context of events, that might mean that organizers need to incorporate different formats and let people choose, but also let them know that, there might be different opportunities within the event with camera on, with camera off, or different formats that would engage different audiences, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think we have to be open to it. And I think also accessibility is a really important thing because not everybody, can do all the different things. Maybe they don't have a webcam or maybe they don't have a high enough internet, connection to be able to support a video. So it's important to make sure that everything's accessible. Even being able to have closed captioning can be very important for people who are hearing impaired. So being aware of all of that and cognizant and respectful of other people's situations is paramount as well.
Yes. One of the latest reports by your company was on audience priorities and what venues should do to drive attendance given health concerns in our COVID times. And I find it highly relevant for event professionals. So can you tell more about this research and about 3 consumer clusters that were identified and recommendations based on the research learnings?
Well, it was a really interesting study because we were thinking about how different venues, right, were dealing with the shutdowns that were going around and also the fear that people had about going to venues. And when I'm talking about venues, I'm talking about movie theaters, concerts, sporting events, all sorts of different places you might go to where there would be a lot of people. Right. And when things were very intense with COVID, I think a lot of these venues lost a lot of money. Some of them closed. They had to let go of a lot of employees. But as things have started opening up, they've had to then shift and really think about, okay, how do we bring people back in? Like what what is going to be the price of admission for people? Like, is it going to be that we need to tell them that we're cleaning every day? Is it going to be that we're telling them that we're checking people before they come in? And all these things are going to cost extra money for these different venues to do, and an extra effort, on the employees. And so really trying to think about understanding consumers' needs better was an interesting question for us. So we decided to do this study by combining two methodologies from psychology and from traditional market research, one being MaxDiff, which is maximal differential, where you have people do a forced choice questionnaire where they're placed with two options, right? What is most important to you? Is it more important that the place is disinfecting all the chairs every day, or is it more important that they're taking people's temperatures when they come in, right? They had to go through a series of those statements to decide what's most important to them. And then we also did an implicit association test to then look at when different consumers, what did they associate with the different situations? So if you're looking at a movie theater, do you associate it with being any of those things? Is it, cleaner? Is it safer? Like, how do you feel about it? So by making those comparisons, you can see the consumers' wants, what they want and expect from a company, a venue, and then also what they currently see. And what that tells the venue then is the need gap. What's that their expectation is not being met by what they're experiencing at the venue. So they want safety at the movie theater, but they don't see it as a safe place. So what can the movie theater do? Well, the most important things they have listed here are that they want temperature checks, they want this or that and that. And what we did find in analyzing that data are those need gaps, but then we also found that you could segment the data. And that's really important when you think about things from a venue standpoint, because you might want to change your messaging depending on the type of consumers that you're looking for. So people who are more likely to be vaccinated, for example, are going to have different expectations and needs than a group that is maybe more anti-vaccination. So depending on because your messaging might actually turn off a group. So you may want to change your messaging depending on the consumer base that you have going for you.
That's brilliant. That's again like a magic, like I said in the beginning. Okay, and I've got a couple of other questions for you to conclude our chat. So, what is, in your opinion, one sensory science finding or insight that event professionals should apply immediately?
I think really that you can use the senses to create emotions, right? So taking that into account, something like fragrance is a very easy sensory input that you can easily factor into your event. There are companies that provide technology for events using fragrance. So you can go to some of these companies and say, I would like a certain type of, feeling filtered into my event space. And they can help you create that by, having different technology that's going to be, misting in different subtle fragrances that can create a mood. And so that can be really important. And easy to do. It's very subtle, but you can create that context, you can create that experience, you can create those emotions. And that can be a great way of really engaging and connecting with your attendees.
Brilliant. Do you have any resources or maybe books that you would recommend for those that are not neuroscientists, those that are not academic people, right, would read and understand it, apply it immediately in practice?
I think, even just doing a rather simple Google search on sensory marketing is a really easy place to start. There are some key leaders in the field that are interesting to look at some of the work that they're doing. For example, Maureen Morin, I believe she's at She was at Temple University, but she's at Rutgers University now. She's done quite a bit of interesting research, and a lot of research papers have been published. Jeanette Haviland-Jones, she's also from Rutgers, and I believe she's retired now, but she's had some really interesting work she's done about spaces and flowers, and how having flowers integrated into a space can change the emotions that people experience. And also this idea that when we create spaces that are sensorily deprived, when we make things more sterile, it actually causes a lot of damage to us psychologically, and that it is beneficial to include things like natural smelling fragrances and natural looking colors, with, plants around and things like that, that it really does affect our psychology. So I think that those are some really interesting places to start. There are lots of books out there about the, importance of integrating psychology and understanding how psychology and neuroscience really, impact our everyday lives and our interaction with brands and locations and things like that. Some of them kind of, take a little bit of liberties with the research, but there's a lot of interesting ones out there. I like ones like, I think there's The Power of Habit. There's Proust Was a Neuroscientist. There's Predictably Irrational. Those are some interesting books to read. Take it all with a grain of salt, because they do tend to exaggerate the findings in the research to sell their narrative. But they are really fun reads, and they really kind of spark interest. And that's an easy place to start. And then look at the research that's cited, right? And then dive a little bit deeper to learn more. And I'm always happy to answer questions. So always feel free to reach out to me as well.
Absolutely. I do encourage everyone to connect with Michelle on LinkedIn, for example, and I will provide all these links and all the titles that you mentioned as well in the show notes. My last question is: so the podcast title is "What If I Told You?" Can you complete this sentence with any one takeaway relevant to our conversation today? So, what if I told you?
What if I told you that there are neuroscientists in just about every company that sells products that you buy every day?
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Michelle, and for your insights. I again encourage everyone to connect with Michelle and check her articles on HCD Research website as well. All links will be provided. Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Advanced Psychology podcast. And for more brain science insights and this episode recap, please join the Advanced Psychology Club. Remember, experiences take place in people's minds. Until next time, bye-bye.